I'm the Executive Director of the History Center of San Luis Obispo County. We are the Historical Society for San Luis Obispo. We were founded because of this space. So the Adobe home behind us was built by Pierre Dallidet, who was a French immigrant, and his wife Ascension Concepcion Salazar. They built the home in 1856. They had 9 children, a child every other year for 18 years. Ascension unfortunately passed away giving birth to the 9th, but that was an unfortunate reality at the time. Fast forward 100 years, the youngest son, Paul Dallidet, was living here and had nobody to leave the home to. And so the community came together and created a nonprofit that would become the History Center in order to receive ownership of the property, of the house, of the family's story, and to preserve it for the future. And so it's truly a pleasure to be able to share the Dallidet home, the Dallidet gardens, and the Dallidet story with the world. And I'm also happy to see the space used in a variety of ways, including this amazing program that we have for you today. With no further ado, I'm going to introduce Shizue Seigel from Right Now, San Francisco, or Right Now Bay Area, who is absolutely phenomenal. I'm so thrilled that she has an interest here in San Luis Obispo and that she wants to help us put on wonderful events like this. So thank you, Shizue.
So, thanks for coming, I'm Shizue Seigel of Right Now SF Bay, our organization has supported Bay Area writers and artists of color and allies through workshops, readings, and anthologies for 7 years. My Central Coast connection is that my Japanese immigrant grandparents lived here from 1905 until 1942, when they were incarcerated during World War II. And they never returned because of the continuing hostility after the war. But my family was really attached to the Central Coast. They grew vegetables on a 140-acre produce farm at the top of Shell Beach, where Sunset Palisades is now. So my mother grew up on that ranch with a sweeping view of that gorgeous arc of sand going all the way down to Guadalupe Dunes. And they also owned storefronts and a hotel on Higuera Street, just south of South Street, the place that it's now a strip mall. But there is still some remnants of Japantown. If you go down South Street, down to Brook Street, there's the Eto Garden and St. Luke's Missionary Baptist Church, which is an African-American church that was started, well, a predecessor of that church was started by African-Americans during World War II. So there's a really rich sort of interlayering of narratives around communities of color. And you know, when I used to come here in the 80s, because my mother was so sentimental, she would bring the kids down here to vacation for 2 weeks, and they learned how to swim at Avila Hot Springs. She would pack her entire kitchen on the top of her car, and we would stay at the Sea Gypsy because she was just so homesick for the place. So I heard a lot of stories growing up about the close-knit community and all of the small farmers along that whole strip above Shell Beach, you know, where McClintock's and the City Hall and all that stuff is. So I've been wanting to figure out some ways to keep that history alive. So I've been working with the History Center and with Eric Brun, the military historian, who has been working on the military history of the segregated African-American artillery regiment that guarded the coast from Monterey down to Point Sal. And their families were not allowed to live in the rest of San Luis, so they moved into the vacated Japantown after the Japanese were forced out. So there's all of these different layers, and then there's lots of arrowheads on that property, on the farmland. So I think that, you know, all of these stories are important, and the land still holds all of those stories. So my hope in inviting some writers of color from San Francisco down here was to try to get to inspire actually communities of color down here to start raising their voices and sharing their stories. So many of us have been taught to keep our heads down and be quiet, and it takes a lot of energy and a lot of courage to make the time to write. But I think all of our stories are important, and I encourage all of you to join this virtual monthly writing workshop that I'm having. It's open to people of color and allies, just to reflect together on how race and ethnicity and economics and politics have, you know, shaped our identities and shaped the land and our relationship to it. So it all sounds a little vague, but I've been doing this for 7 years, and I know that magic can happen when we get together. So the folks that are going to be reading today, Dr. Sandra Bass has contributed to several of the anthologies. She's an Associate Dean of Students and Executive Director at the Public Service Center at UC Berkeley. She's an advisory board member of the Jefferson Awards Foundation and Stanford University's Haas Center for Public Service. She earned her PhD in political science at UC Berkeley with research on community organizing and dynamics between police and communities of color. She has led programs for girls and women in sub-Saharan Africa for the David and Lucille Packard Foundation, served as executive director with Teach with Africa, and board chair of the Ella Baker Center for Human Rights. The next reader will be Karla Brundage. She's curator for the 2023 Litquake Poetic Tuesday reading series and founder of West Oakland to West Africa Poetry Exchange. She's a graduate of Vassar College and Mills College MFA program and the San Francisco State Clinical Schools Project. She grew up in Hawaii and taught high school in Africa for 3 years. In all of her travels, she has sought cultural understanding and healing and connection that arise from sharing stories. Her books include, and they're back on the table back there, so take a look before you leave. Her books include Swallowing Watermelons, Mulatta, Not So Tragic, and the anthologies Sisters Across Ocean, Our Spirits Carry Our Voices, and Black Rootedness, 54 Poets from Africa to the Americas. And her website is karlabrundage.com. Jaime Cortez is a Chicano writer and visual artist based in Watsonville and the San Francisco Bay Area. He often combines humor and tragedy to tell stories of resilient survivors on the margins of the economy. On the margins of the economy, the law, and social acceptability. His debut story collection, Gordo, was published by Black Cat Grove Atlantic Press in 2022 and is based on his own humorous and heartbreaking experiences among migrant farm laborers in San Juan Bautista and Watsonville. He's the first of his family to attend college, and he received his BA from University of Pennsylvania and his Fine Art MFA at UC Berkeley. His visual arts have been shown at the San Francisco Arts Commission Gallery, Some Arts, Strut Mercury, California Institute of Integral Studies, and many other venues. His website is JaimeCortez.org. That's JaimeCortez. And I'm Shizue Seigel, the founder and director of Right Now SFA. My 8 books include In Good Conscience, Supporting Japanese Americans During the Internment, and My First 100 Years, The Memoirs of Nellie Nakamura, and five Right Now anthologies. You can check all of these books out at the back table. So I'm going to start out the reading by reading you an excerpt of a poem about my grandmother. Bachan, Grandma. Of you, I know mostly facts, not feeling. Your eyes were like jet, brightly opaque. They saw all, without a hint of weakness. Gaman, endure, persevere beyond hope. Kichinto shinasai, do it the right way. The year before you died in 1981, you thought you were a little girl again, back in Japan. You dreamed you died, but the gatekeeper sent you back because you hadn't suffered enough. They say nirvana, the Pure Land, awaits those who can say 3 times from the heart, Namandab, Namandab, Namandab. I put my faith in the Buddha. In 1913, you put your faith in a man who called you to California. He sparked the wanderlust born in your blood. Sorry. Because you had been born in Hawaii before your parents dragged themselves back from the plantations in defeat, back to the cramped village in Japan. So when the man from the next village called you to join him in California, you went. He was plain but sturdy, courted you with photos of horse and plow, haystack and wagon, wooden irrigation flumes. So you packed up your kimonos and steamed over the long, long ocean to the big land, where he bought you a hat with ostrich plumes and a billowing shirt waist with mutton-like sleeves. You placed your faith in this man, this life, this land, and it was all good. Though children died and crops failed, you prayed to the Buddha in the dining room and Kami-sama in the kitchen. When plows turned up arrowheads, you brought a Shinto priest 200 miles to placate the spirits who had roamed the land before you. You and your husband worked together, Ishoni. Ishokenmei, you worked with all your might, worked with the alien land laws, shipped your produce to LA and the East Coast, dressed your sons in sailor suits and your daughter in silk stockings. You bought property in San Luis, Japantown, near the Buddhist church that became the Japanese barbershop, the fish market, the pool hall, the hotel, and gas station. You planned, when your kids grew up, for them to be the pharmacist, the seamstress, and the garage mechanic. Where did your faith go in 1933 when your husband drove into a telephone pole? A silly little accident until his stomach filled up with blood. The hospital would not x-ray. The insurance company would not pay double indemnity for accidental death. You said he might not have died if he'd been white, but you only said it once out loud. But your children say, for months, you walked the cliff's edge and stood at the end of the churning sea, looking westward towards home. Gaman and gambate, suck it up, never give up. Put your faith in 140 acres and 4 children. You made your 13-year-old learn to drive so you could collect the rents in Japantown. Throughout the Great Depression, you covered the mortgage. When the tenants pled, we can't pay this month. The business is too slow. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu. Forget forever in your debt. Long after the war, Issei ladies bowed and you bowed back. I was too young to notice who bowed deeper. You hired a foreman to manage the ranch. Lettuce and peas and cantaloupe thrived in the moist sea air. Then a white man bought half the land from under you, planning to turn a profit by doubling your lease. But you told him no, moved off his land and up the hill, built another house, and put your faith in your community. Let's all tell him no. For a full year, no Nihonjin leased the land. The land lay fallow until the landlord knuckled under and let you come back at the same price. That kind of Jap conspiracy could not go unpunished. So in 1942, Pearl Harbor forced you from the coast. You moved outside the curfew zone, first 5 miles east and then 100 miles further, trying to stay ahead of the barbed wire until it finally snagged you just outside of Fresno and cast you east of the Colorado River, where, over the objections of the Indian tribes, you were imprisoned with thousands of others in the searing desert, in acres of tar paper shimmering like a mirage that would not dissolve. Tucked inside your shoe was all that remained of your previous life. A clipping. Jap house burns to the ground. And $2,000 from the realtor who bought your Japantown properties, saying, "You'll never be able to keep up the mortgage. I know you put put 50,000 into it. Let me do you a favor and take it off your hands for 2,000." He even put his name on the hotel your husband built. How many dollars did you have left when they let you out in 1946? Don't come back to the coast, friends warned. They're shooting out our windows at night. They won't sell us gas or fertilizer. So you came north to start again at 57, on your knees, sharecropping strawberries in another tar paper compound, this one filled with former incarcerees. In 10 years, you saved enough to buy 10 acres of your own. So thank you. So next, Sandra Bass.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming. That is just, I've heard that before, Shizue, but it's just really powerful writing. And I highly encourage you, come to her workshop. Tell your friends. You know, she has a real talent for helping people discover the writer inside of them, even if you don't think that's who you are. And thank you to the Dallidet Gardens for this beautiful setting. So, as Shizue mentioned, you know, there's a long history of people of color in this area. My own family has somewhat roots here. My dad came here as a very young boy and lived throughout the Salinas Valley all the way down to Paso Robles. And my mother came in Santa Cruz. And the piece I'm going to read is about my trip to the South to discover some family history. But it starts talking a little bit about my parents.
Is the mic on?
Is it? Oh, sure.
It would be great if we could hear the full.
Aim it to your mouth. Aim it.
Is it on?
There.
Okay, maybe it needs to be a little higher.
Pick it up higher and aim it directly to you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Great. I'm going to try to do this on my iPad. So the name of this is The Stories of the South Are the Stories of a Nation and Need to Be Told. Both of my parents are children of the South. My mother was born in a small town just outside of Jackson, Mississippi. For over a century, her family had lived on the same lands they had first worked as enslaved people and then later as sharecroppers. As members of her family sought warmer suns, they ventured to California and came back with stories of the simple yet unknown pleasures they found there. "You need to get out of this place," said one. So the story goes. In California, a colored man can walk down the street and pick oranges right off a tree and nobody will bother you. Shortly thereafter, my grandfather went to check out this land of freedom and riches for himself, and within the year had relocated the family to San Jose. They found a home in the city's Japantown not long after the forced evacuation and internment. Although it's not clear who lived in the house before them, I've often wondered if my family's hopes of securing a piece of the American dream were built on those hopes being dashed for a Japanese American family. My father's hometown of Phoenix City, Alabama, was so infamous for its long history of wickedness and corruption that at one point it was nicknamed Sodom. The tale of what it took to clean up the city inspired the film noir classic, The Phoenix City Story. My grandmother was an unmarried teen when she gave birth to my father in the family's lean-to shack on top of Glover's Hill, not far from the Chattahoochee River. His childhood memories are threaded with stories of navigating through the waterfront saloons, gambling houses, and brothels in search of an uncle who could toss the family a few coins to get by. Their California dreams landed the two of them in Soledad in 1948. My grandmother got a job as a cook and found a home within a farm laborers camp, and for the next few years they lived and traveled with the farm workers throughout the Salinas Valley. Although my family had left long before I was born, the South permeated our home. It hung heavy in the air on Thanksgiving when the stink of chitlins would linger long, long, long after they were cooked and eaten. It would ride in on a wave of laughter, book-taking, and trash-talking when family and friends settled in for a game of bid whist. On Easter, it would push up against my father's atheist tendencies until he relented and took us to church to recite Bible verses before my grandmother's congregation. And on those relatively rare occasions when we would cross paths with another black person in our corner of suburban San Jose, it was my mother's Southern sensibilities that led her to always smile and speak. And yet my understanding of the South, and specifically the Deep South, was fixed in time. It was fueled by ingrained customs, bits of ancestral memory, brief visits to the region, and when I learned from reading about slavery and the Southern black freedom struggle of the 60s. For the most part, family members shared little of their experiences. Instead, they seemed to hold on to their stories until the weight of them had lifted or had grown so heavy that like dew collecting on a leaf, they sagged and dropped, one detail at a time. No one in my family longed for the South. Most never returned. And with each passing generation, its grip on our family's traditions loosened. So a few years ago, I realized I needed to visit my family's ancestral home, in part to explore my family history, but also to better understand the region and the persistence of its imprint. Southern air is insistently intimate. Moist, clinging, warm, it lies on the skin, coaxing sweat out of pores. Trees hug highways, byways, back roads, and dirt roads. In the summer, visible heat waves emanate up from the pavement, penetrating shoe bottoms and warming soles. The environmental embrace of the region is hard to escape. Visiting the South for the first time, Harlem-born writer James Baldwin observed that even though he was in a country he had never seen before, something in me had come home. And so it was with me. Something in the air, the land, the brown faces I passed on the street felt familiar and welcoming, as if my ancestors had been waiting to receive me. Baldwin spent several weeks in the South shortly after the end of the Montgomery bus boycott. He was so terrified about traveling in the region, he flew between most of his locations. 60 years later, I had my trepidations as well, particularly since I was traveling solo during this time of neo-Nazi and KKK revivalism. However, I decided to drive. My road trip began in Atlanta and ended 900 miles later in Jackson, Mississippi, with stops throughout Alabama and Mississippi. To reach the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama, which is better known as the Lynching Memorial, my mapping system routed me past the first White House of the Confederacy. Secessionists consecrated the house to their cause in 1861, and the city has been known as the cradle of the Confederacy ever since. When Baldwin visited in 1957, locals shared that people still wandered the halls of that house and wept. Nearly 100 years after the fall of the Confederacy, one can only guess what exactly they were mourning. Lovingly preserved by the state of Alabama and the ladies of the First White House Association, the birthplace of the Confederacy represents the finest in Italianate architecture. White, pristine, manicured, with blood-red chimneys fortifying its frame. Less than 10 blocks away, the Lynching Memorial sits at the top of a gentle slope. It is massive, spanning over 6 acres. Tarnished steel sculptures of black men and women chained, Kneeling, screaming, pleading, rust running down their naked bodies mark the entrance. Over 800 corroded steel columns, representing the counties where lynchings have been documented, hang from the structure, much like black bodies hung from trees. Inscribed on each are the names of the 4,384 African Americans known to have been murdered in the period between the end of the Civil War and the beginning of the Civil Rights Movement. Although the full death toll is far greater than that. As I walked between the columns looking at the counties for where my family had lived, at times I would reflexively reach out and touch a name, calling them in for just a moment. Near the end, a guide asked me what I thought, and I said, overwhelmed. Yeah, he said, looking off into the depths of the memorial. It's a lot to take in. Following his gaze through the vast field of stolen lives, I had no words. And so it goes throughout Montgomery, in fact, throughout the South. The Legacy Museum, which charts the unbroken history from African American enslavement to mass incarceration, stands within Montgomery's former slave market. In Birmingham and Jackson, Confederate monuments are minutes away from sites commemorating the Civil Rights Movement. In Alabama and Mississippi, the legacies of Confederate General Robert E. Lee and Martin Luther King Jr. are celebrated on the same day. Historian Barbara Fields captured the significance of this perpetual contest over memory and meaning succinctly. The Civil War is still going on. It's still to be fought, and regrettably, it can still be lost. From the South to San Jose, the 17th century to the 21st, the war rages on. My family did build a good life in California. At times, we also found ourselves navigating the minefields of race without the solace of living within a black community. Our California dreams were complicated. Reporting from the front lines of the 1960s, Baldwin feared that all that was left of the great dream that was to have become America was the illusion of greatness, a narrow narrative used to justify the exercise of power. Illusions rarely go down without a fight, and this one is particularly tenacious as we see crowds chanting, "Make America Great Again." However, liberation begins with truth-telling, and that truth holds both shadows and light. It is the lynching memorial uncovering the brutality at the heart of the well-trod narrative of the gallant South. It's also the story of ordinary folks rising up and facing down a centuries-old system of oppression, wielding unarmed truth, a belief in our inescapable connectedness, and faith in the inevitable triumph of justice. These are the stories of the South. These are the stories of the nation, and both need to be told. That which weaves us together transcends time, histories, identities, and geographies. My travels through the South revealed that this holds true whether we know it, honor it, like it, or not. We can flail around in our ignorance and bump up against each other like leaves on the wind as fate allows. We can give into the tyranny of our darkest impulses and allow fear to flow freely through our social web, manifested as chains, bars, and walls to justify delusions of superiority and separation. Or we can embrace the inescapable truth that my liberation is inextricably bound with yours, and act with courage and humility to foster a reverence for all life. We can choose. We can choose. And given the challenges we face as a human community, we must choose. Thank you. Now I'm going to welcome up Karla.
Next is Karla Brundage.
Is this good? Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. Thank you, Shizue. It's been a really beautiful adventure. I was invited to join Shizue and other poets from the Uncommon Ground anthology because there's so many connections. You know, my family, my parents went to UC Berkeley and are from the South in New York. And in the end, after a hate crime against one of my mom's first cousins, they wound up moving to Hawaii. So the story I'm going to tell is about growing up in Hawaii. Growing up mixed race in Hawaii sounds like a cliche, except for my particular mix. In the Hawaii of the 70s, being part black and part Caucasian was far from the normal melange of exotic combinations that are part of the Western psyche found in the remote Pacific. While hapa is a word commonly used in Hawaii for those of mixed heritage, this term has traditionally excluded popolo, black folks. As a child, I was unaware of this, and I identified as hapa until I learned that being hapa meant Asian or Hawaiian and white. So my basic tagline became I was half black and half white. I did not account for any shades or remnants of miscegenation. I did not account for subtleties of ancestry. Most people wanted to know why I was brown and why I was not then of a commonly understood phenotype. My mathematical solution seemed to put all the inquiries to rest. Eventually I learned there was a term for my specific combination, mulatto, and I embraced it fully. I have been asked why I don't identify as Hawaiian. Simply put, I'm not Hawaiian. Hawaiian people are the descendants of indigenous inhabitants of the Hawaiian Islands who trace their ancestry to Tahiti. My family is from Alabama via slave ship, via West Africa and the Congo, and from upstate New York via Germany and the Protestant Reformation. I also have a number of indigenous ancestors originally from the Powhatan territory now known as Virginia. Maybe that's why I became a writer. In 6th grade, I began to caw like a bird in class. I would suddenly become stiff, stare into space, and then my mouth would open and I would shout, caw, caw, like a raven. This phenomena had many impacts on my identity and how I was perceived. My neighbor, who was 11 at the time and recently arrived from Samoa, told me she believed I could be a witch. This was an identity I loved and also embraced. We spent hours wandering the rugged mountains collecting popolo berries, which created a purple dye, and red berries, mashing them up with other fruits like pomegranates. We made potions in bottles that we found on the beach, which had floated over from distant lands such as Japan, China, and even Russia. My sudden bird calls and moments of staring into space prompted the teacher to send me to the principal or nurse the first couple of times, until she realized that I did not remember at all what was happening and that my class disruptions were not deliberate. One day, the calling stopped, my eyes rolled back in my head, and I had the first of many grand mal seizures. I can remember my teacher dragging me by one arm to the principal's office as I kicked and screamed after coming to consciousness. My life's goal became to be seen as normal. But I was not normal. I wore my hair in cornrows and was called the N-word. People always apologized to me for saying the word black, or worse, and also I did not speak Pidgin, the local dialect in my small community. On the long walks home from school, I was bullied until I learned how to become a bully for survival. In class and at home, I read early in life and enjoyed spelling quizzes. One of my most fraught memories was in 3rd grade when it occurred to me that if I wanted, I could learn new vocabulary and I could train my tongue to speak Pidgin. I wanted to fit in, to be accepted in our small plantation town. After a couple of days, our beloved teacher, and it is important to note here that she was of Hawaiian descent, pulled me aside in the class and sat me on her lap. She said something I will never forget. It changed my future, but also further alienated me from my community. She said, "Karla, you have so much potential. I do not want to hear you speaking Pidgin. All these kids here," and she made a sweeping gesture towards my classmates, None of them are going anywhere, but you are. If you start to speak Pidgin, you will never go anywhere. She said that in Pidgin. A cloud of darkness enshrouded me as I comprehended these words, this threat from a mentor and teacher I greatly admired. My mother had also scolded me for trying on this new tongue. Kids laughed at me when my mouth could not form the words. So I put all languages in a box and locked them up. I think this has also impacted my ability to speak French, Spanish, as well as Russian. Things have changed since then. My mother is a poet, professor, and political activist. Her story and life have inspired me. Marie Waddell Brundage Takara, daughter of Lottie Young and William Henry Waddell IV, grew up in Tuskegee, Alabama. My white father, Frederick William Brundage, spent the last 40 years of his life writing and rewriting a memoir about his marriage to my black mother in the 60s, as well as the rise of the counterculture generation, and finally, after his second divorce, his decision to leave society completely and live off the grid. His memoir does not mention me or my birth at all. However, he always told me that he felt a part of his decision to marry my mother was to have a mixed-race child and to participate in the creation of a new race, effectually to change the world. Was this my burden or his? So, there's more. I hope you all buy the book. I did want to read two short poems because I've come a long way, but I'm still on the same theme of mulatto, so I have a book called Mulatta, Not So Tragic. And I'm just going to read two short poems to close. This one is called In Memory of, also for Zora Neale Hurston, and Lorraine's Hansberry. And the souls of black folk will listen finally to the black, brown, tragic girl. See that she is all the ocean, the coral, and the fish below, not just the star or the paper bag, but plastic and showing out. Glitter, sequins, pop balloons, debris, and college degrees. She is everything and the kitchen sink. Nothing she is. Flowing tears that teach, not tear, her hair songs of never had a voice until now. She is young and gifted. She is watching God who colored her outside of white-black lines. Gifted and kissed black by blood which lies in lines of genealogy, so full of voice, waiting to escape, throat closed and choked by silencing the whole bigness of her. Muddy waters flow deep, angel wings and trouble, spilling out and bottled. Her hope belongs to the sky. And finally, bid purity adieu. Resist, resist, resist the temptation to be swallowed whole by the invisibility you fear most. You hybrid hibiscus, you yellow rose, you lemon lime, unduly delicious in your ambiguity. When they label you Sprite, you want to be Coke or tonic. Drink deeply, my love, of yourself and your roots, the Carolinas and the Orleans, the courtesan bonded in freedom, the traitor, the landowner, women with sexual power, men who passed, mulatto elite. Stand proud in your treachery, your skin color allowed you. Reach back and push forward, yellow gal. Do you deserve forgiveness for betraying your mother and father both, for abandoning your own kin for your own survival? Embrace your savagery. Eat from the plate you were handed. Silver spoon yourself to sleep. Bid purity adieu. Embrace your savagery. Thank you. Now, Jaime Cortez.
Good afternoon, everyone. How's my sound? Okay, good. Thank you so much, everybody, for coming out. This is such a beautiful setting, and it's lovely to see all these new faces of folks here in this area. I'm Jaime Cortez, and I'm going to read to you today from my debut short story collection called Gordo. And these stories are very heavily autobiographical stories, and they are kind of based in my experiences of growing up on migrant farm worker camps in the area of San Juan Bautista, and then later living in Watsonville, another agricultural town that's nearby. The main character, Gordo, or Fatty, that's me basically as a little kid, about age 9, a bookish kid, a naive kid who's also very observant and watches the world and tries to figure out how to navigate it. A kind of so that's the kid, and Gordo is also a sissy, and he doesn't know he's queer yet, but he is. So this is a little bit of a reading from a story called El Gordo, which takes place on the farm worker camp, and most of the story is about Gordo and his hapless father. El Gordo. It's Sunday morning. We went to morning mass at the mission in San Juan Bautista like always. My mom and Sylvia are visiting my nana next door like always. Pa's at the big red barn flea market like always. I'm home alone in my bunk, lying on my stomach, eating Fritos, reading like always. Encyclopedia Brown Saves the Day is so cool. I would definitely be friends with Encyclopedia Brown if I went to his school. I hear the station wagon park in the spot right next to my window. Pa is home from the flea market. I hear him open the front door, call my name, stomp across the kitchen, right into me and Sylvie's little bedroom. Right away, I could smell beer, but not too much. Surprise, he says. He's a little drunk, but he's not mad. So even though my ma's not home, I think I'll be okay. Maybe. He puts a big box on the floor right next to my bed. It's wrapped up with a rope tied in a messed up bow on top. My nickname, Gordo, is written on it in my pa's big, ugly letters. What's that, I ask. A present, says Pa. It's not my birthday. It's not Christmas. I'm surprised to get a present. Really, Pa? For me, I ask. Correcto. It's yours, Gordo. Why? Just because, says Pa. Oh my God, my first just because present.